My guest today is Katy Theakston, the founder of The Owl and the Apothecary. Katy and I first met at the Wellbeing by the Lakes Festival when we shared a stage and talked about this topic of reimagining elderhood. Now, that conversation ended with a mass group hug with the whole audience. So I am very curious to see where this conversation goes. But it also gives an indication of some of the layers of sensitivity and emotion and personal reflection and connection that comes when we start to imagine our future selves and start to imagine this state of being, which, all things going well, we will all reach. Welcome to the Henny podcast, the space for deepening self-awareness with profound self-compassion. I'm Henny. I write, coach, and speak about how exploring our inner world can transform how we experience our outer world, all founded on a bedrock of self-love. Settle in and listen and see where the episode takes you. Before we dive in today, I want to flag that Katy shares a story, or rather touches on a story from her childhood, which could potentially be challenging to listen to. Katy, so we've obviously just been talking and we're now diving into the conversation, but I do want to welcome you before I lead into what I was going to say. So just, yeah, your official warm and gorgeous welcome here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me into this space that I know is going to be deep and delicious for us, as well as for anyone, the women, the men, folks who will be tuning into this. So ready for this moment.
Do you know what? It's so interesting, isn't it? Because I think sometimes we have an idea, we sort of barrel toward it, we stick something in the diary, we write an email. And if we're not careful, we then barrel through it.
Yes, agreed.
And what I feel is that we are really landing, this is a sacred space. I just have this really strong sense of it. So, and unsurprising. But that feels, I really want to honor that, and really honor everyone who's listening as well, because this is the collective energy, isn't it?
Yes, it really is. And it's such a beautiful time of year, this, as we're coming into the fullness and ripeness of midsummer, although you wouldn't think it with what's happening with the weather at the moment. But there is, it's always such a lovely time to take our cues from what is happening in the natural world. Everything is coming to, it's kind of like fecundity and fullness, and moving with these spirals and moving with these seasons always feels like a very rich, and I know this isn't a word, but narrative full space and way to live and be.
So this has sort of returned me to that thought that made me go, I really want to start recording, which is something that you just so beautifully shared, prompted this thought from me about something that I see a lot. And I used to talk about it in terms of menopause. I used to sort of say, well, I see this a lot in midlife women, but actually I see it in all of us. That it's almost like when we were children, maybe in that sort of that age, I think you and I might have spoken about this before, that sort of just kind of like pre-teens age. It's like someone gives us a box and says, this is where you put all the things in life that are too painful, too complicated, too time consuming, too disturbing for others, too much. This is where you put all of that, all of those feelings and thoughts and beliefs, everything goes in this box. And then we dutifully keep doing that and keep doing it. And then we carry this box through our lives. And my sense is that there are moments in our life where the stuff inside that box comes knocking, and we can either kindly, mindfully open up that box and see, oh, my darling, like, what's asking for my attention here? Or we sit with grim determination on the lid, desperately terrified that some of it might escape. And for me, actually, I hadn't even like had this thought before we opened the conversation, but for me, I think that is a big part actually of this topic of reimagining elderhood, which is about like, how do we like prepare ourselves so we're not going into our like wisdom years or our, you know, our sort of later years in life, gripping to the lid of this box, freaking out in case the stuff gets out.
Mm.
And I have seen that, and I'm sure you have seen that in
Yes.
loved ones, people that I care for. And with that comes this sort of this kind of like this tender realization that actually this stuff that's inside the box, you know, it's not frightening. Feels
Mm.
frightening. Can feel really scary. But actually, if we send it our love at the time when we're ready, then releasing it can be a very different experience from the one we might expect it to be.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree, and I'm really happy to share the the beginning of that our conversation in this space, because you know it might help other people to understand more about what might be in their box. Um, and you know, I was saying to Henny before we came into this life space that I feel like I know what is happening within this next spiral of my life and what needs to be attended to. And when I was 13, I had a very unsavory sexual experience that I dutifully put into the box, and I wrapped chains around it and I dropped it to the bottom of the ocean, never to be seen, heard, spoken of again. And I can remember in my 20s, I mentioned it once to a family friend in a drunken kind of, this just needed to escape a little bit somehow. And then in my late 30s, I spoke to it about to a couple of other people. And then it wasn't till my 40s that it kind of was I do need to just say the words. There was no healing or anything that was done around it. I just needed to say the words to another human being. And it feels now, I was 50 last October, and it feels now I feel safe in my body. I feel safe in the human that I am, and with the wisdom that I know that this can be looked at now. I can hold the feelings of shame and humiliation and pain and the impact that it has had on my entire life. I've been unable to develop deep relationships with men, and it's not I'm mistrustful of them, but there is a strand in there that follows that. I mean, I had a child on my own. I had IVF with an anonymous donor, and it's kind of like, it's only now that I'm safely looking back at it and just seeing those patterns and seeing how the deep imprint that it has made on me. And it feels like, as part of this, if a feeling or an emotional or event had a evolutionary process, that I'm at the point of that evolution that I can hold it and look in it with, as you so beautifully said, with kindness and compassion. And it might not be as frightening as as it feels, but it's part of this. As I come into this, my midlife, my kind of threshold into elderhood, I don't want to come into it feeling brittle or held in a way that isn't mine, or and I'm really happy and willing to explore that further for myself, um, and to lead by example with my experiences that have happened to me, to show these are the slightly edgier, uncomfortable parts, but this is how I know I can move myself through it. Because if we can all have that gift, if we can all have that movement through these things, these thoughts, these feelings, but not to be defined by them, the freedom that comes with that, the levity, the lightness, the softness that can come with that is more beautiful than holding the of it.
Yeah. Katy, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think, gosh, I mean, there's so much in what you said. There's so much self-compassion in what you said. And also the thing that I'm really minded of is kind of allowing that this feels like a time when it feels okay. And sort of, I can't remember if this was before or after I pressed record, but this idea of like not kind of like creating resistance, not sort of pushing hard against something, either telling ourselves I've got to deal with this when we're not ready, or kind of resisting dealing with it when maybe something is opening up that gives us a portal, an opportunity to step into having a slightly different relationship with an experience that we've had. So it's kind of like this, I have this sort of sense of like part of this transition, this kind of movement into elderhood is also about really learning how to listen to ourselves.
Yes.
And trust.
Yes. And yes, and it also it feels like, you know, there is that, okay, those first 50 years of, you know, and I can see how I've kind of pushed it away through, you know, abandoning myself with alcohol or drugs or, you know, all of the things, just to kind of like, okay, I just don't, you know, what else can I do over here to not look at that? And it's almost like those first 50 years have been, okay, that was kind of that was hard and painful and edgy and beautiful and all of the chaotic and messy and all of those things. But how can I take that and turn that into wisdom? How can I turn that into allowing the next 50 years of my life? Because in all honesty, we're going to be living to 100, and how glorious is that? How can I then live through that with more softness, more receivingness, more connection with my actual true self and with other humans, and, you know, a man with a big smile and a hairy chest, you know, all of those things. And I really want to consciously create that. I really want to make that happen. Now that I feel, oh, okay, I can see all of those things for what they are. How can I reweave a story that feels juicy, and a story that feels, I don't know where the word tidal is coming, but I can move with it more freely.
There's something I'm loving the imagery that's coming up as well. The man with the big smile and the hairy chest.
Yes.
We love
I'm here for all of that.
we love that. And also this sort of sense of the tidal, because that for me is like flow, is being in this place of flow, and flow involves a lot of trust in ourselves, in the recognition of our experiences and how we've navigated them, and the resources that we have, and all of that stuff, and the wisdom we've gathered. And there was something else that really came up for me as well, is I think often one of the challenges about coming up into a different age, like from whatever point we're at, so like whether it's like our 20s into our 30s, or our 50s into our 60s, 70s, or our 70s into our 90s, you know, we often that that future person feels like a stranger. And I mean, I know, so big part of my background is working in financial services, which feels like a strange thread to have introduced into this beautiful sacred space, but it's part of,
it's in, we welcome it.
It's part of the life. But one of the things that we researched was why it's so hard for people to save for themselves. And often it's because it feels like we're saving money for someone that we don't know. We're saving for a stranger. And so therefore it's very hard for us to look after this future person because it's someone that we don't know. And I think a big part of this, and I really have this like strong sense with you, is that you have a sense of your future self. You have a sense of love and compassion and curiosity and vibrancy and excitement about this future woman that you will be.
Yes.
And that I think is so vital. So I'm really curious about like these ways in which we can create this connection in order that doesn't feel so scary, because then maybe it feels less scary dealing with the previous stuff too.
Absolutely. And that's exactly as you were saying about how creating that relationship, or nurturing that relationship with my future self is also a part of nurturing that relationship with a past version of myself. And there's something so beautiful when you can look at yourself beyond the sacred kind of vessel that we are here today, and honor this physical body and this spiritual body and this emotional body that has brought me safely to here. Okay, yes, there's some bits in there that need attending to, and it feels like tending. It feels like a very gentle, how you tend to plants. There's a softness in there, but then there is this kind of sending that energy out to future self. And I write letters to my future self. I do, so I can kind of really imagine what and who she is and the woman that I am becoming. And more often than not, she comes in as this kind of quite prue leaf. she's got a little dash of lipstick on, and she's kind of not well put together as in suited, but she knows who she is. And I see, and she is never, like, I will see myself, or I see myself doing this work until I am drawing my last few breaths. I feel so deeply in this space about connecting women to themselves, connecting women to the land, to the earth, and connecting women to women, so that there is this great big cycle of wisdom sharing and understanding. And it feels like there is an absence of these spaces. There is an absence of spaces where we can have an 80-year-old, woman sharing her experiences with a 20-year-old, and there's a 50-year-old in those spaces. More of those, please. Because that's where this kind of understanding of not just our different phases, as in, okay, well, we're going from, whether you want to look at it as the kind of like maiden, mother, crone archetypes, or, this is going off at a slight tangent, but there's kind of, let's come off autopilot. Let's come off the trajectory that is put upon us by societal, well, we're going to get married in our 20s and 30s, and we're going to do all of these things as kind of set out. Let's come off that autopilot and let's genuinely look around. What are we excited by? What is our, what desires are we kind of, what are coming in? How do we want to be living? How do we want to be thinking? How do we want to be feeling? How do we want to be behaving?
For me,
yes.
Oh, I was just going to say, for me, like a big part of this is something like that. There are no rules, and so often, God, I mean, definitely definitely had a sense that there were, I wouldn't have necessarily named it as such, but when I look back, there were certain like rules that I was following subconsciously.
Yeah.
And what I hear and what you're saying is this sort of thing of like, actually, there are no rules. You know, I love, there's that sort of quote, I can't remember who said it, but nobody knows how to play this game of life. And it's so true. And yet what we're constantly doing is looking for stuff that gives us a sense of control in a space that can feel very scary and unstable. And the challenge is, I think, is that we then sort of grasp onto these things that gave us a sense of solidity or security, and we keep using the same tools, the same strategies, the same mechanisms. And actually, as we move into different phases in our life, whatever that might be, those strategies may not serve us anymore. Maybe that there's room to do something new. But also what I'm hearing is actually you're saying like, oh, like just stand naked, like in nature, and really
Always.
experience what that is like.
Yes.
And the other thing I really want to pick up on as well was what you said about spaces where younger women, women in midlife, women in sort of later years can all connect and be together. And I think that is a space that is very rare, actually. And sometimes for good reason. Like sometimes we need to be with our kind of tribe. Sometimes having that, like the safety of that can be really important. And I really want to bring in like the masculine energy into this as well, because
Does it have a hairy chest, this masculine
it might
energy?
have a hairy chest. It might do.
Yes.
I'm just saying. Because it's like I see particularly among the sort of younger men who I have met. I've met so many incredible young men at festivals, which makes sound a bit odd, but young men that I've had these astonishing conversations with, where they are discovering how in their friendship group they're able to hold space when someone needs to cry,
Mm,
which for a man in his 30s or a man in his 20s, or a man any age really, is such a big thing, and yet something that women are so comfortable with doing. And
yeah.
so I kind of I kind of want to sort of honor this work as well, that men from a divine masculine sort of perspective are also bringing in. And I kind of like, I always get a bit sort of a bit tied up. Actually, I can kind of hear it in my voice because my brain sort of going off in lots of different angles. I get a little bit tied up when I start to sort of think about like female only spaces and male only spaces.
Yes, I hear you on that, because there is, without, so as we, and we often talk about sisterhood, as a thing, and I am all here for that. It is where my work is currently centered. But this this kind of sisterhood cannot exist without a healthy brotherhood.
Mm.
And a healthy brotherhood is spaces where exactly as you have just described, where men can collect and can gather and can express themselves safely. And yes, there is a unity that can happen with the sisterhood and the brotherhood when it is healthily, when it can be healthy.
Mm.
Like I can see even in this kind of sisterhood spaces, there is this kind of feminine toxicity that can come in and be, make these spaces hierarchical, or make these spaces, paying X amount of, I don't know, they just become suddenly, oh, that feels really uncomfortable all of a sudden. And it's almost like they are bringing some of the structures that we are trying to pull away from into those spaces, and it suddenly becomes counterintuitive as to what we are trying to create in those. And I would love to see more brotherhood spaces, whatever they are called, because I can see the value for women to feel safe, to be able to express themselves, to be heard in a very non-judgmental way. And I feel for the men folks that is it's key to our evolution, where we're at evolutionary, where we're in this lovely juicy age of Aquarius, where as a collective we are all moving forward, but we have to do the healing work. We have to do that work in order to be able to move in that flowy, ebby, tidal way.
Well, and that comes right back to that beautiful and tender story that you shared of how you're nurturing and supporting yourself as you do that work within you. And so it's for me, like, so much of this experience of life feels like concentric circles. So I am in the center of my own series of concentric circles, and you are in the center of yours. And those circles will like pools of water, you sort of drop a stone and the ripples will meet and merge, and then they'll sort of drift, and then they'll merge with somebody else. And that for me is like a sort of beautiful way of like human connection. But I am always in the center of my own ripples.
Yes.
And this sort of sense that like we need to do this work on ourselves in order to be able to have that kind of energetic outflow into the next sort of circle of connection around us, and the next around that, and the next around that. And the challenge is, I think, often when we see that something which has been created with all of the best intent, but is bringing in some of maybe the kind of patriarchal systems, or the sort of more like kind of capitalist kind of like hierarchical sort of structures, that often what it is that whatever that energy is that's at the center of it hasn't yet done that deep healing, and so it's still kind of reaching for something which feels known.
Yes, the familiar.
And that speaks again to there are no rules, because of course, like when we're reaching for the familiar, it's like, well, I know that works, but it's like, maybe there's another way. Like,
yes. And does it work?
And does it work?
And who's it working for? How's and just to your point about this kind of us being at our own centers of our beautiful pools, which sound glorious if we can be naked in them, is this and everyone talks about doing the work, the healing work, and I don't want that to sound like I don't want to be dismissive of it, but also I don't want it to sound like it is a hard thing, a necessary thing.
Yes.
But and that self in the center will go through these spirals of healing. It's not as though you go, cool, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to heal myself. It doesn't just happen like I've read a book and therefore I'm healed, or I've done a program or a course and therefore I am healed. Each spiral that we go through, something else will either kind of come up out of the shadow and go, hi, it's me this time. And you're like, okay, well, you're welcome. Come on in. Yeah. And then the next spiral will be something else. And it feels like it's a life's work, a life's project, a life. I don't mean you haven't got some good words for it, but it is this ever evolving, ever expanding, ever, and it always feels like it's heading more and more and more towards love.
Absolutely. And Katy, I think it's so interesting, these sort of themes, none of which were the things that we thought we were going to be weaving in, but this theme of like this box, I call it the real Pandora's box. And what I'm sort of just listening to you there, it's this kind of very gentle, very tender, very mindful sort of allowing of like, well, what is coming up here? What is asking for my attention? And rather than shutting the lid, going, okay, my darling,
Yeah.
you are welcome here. You know, the whole of me is welcome here, and you are part of me.
Mm.
And that work continues for the rest of our life. It's not that, you know, if you've done the work in your 20s, you've got an empty box in your 30s, and that's it. You're completely sorted because, you know,
Mm.
hands up, anyone who's listening, and, you know, you and I, like, have you ever had that feeling of like, oh, well, that's dealt with?
Here is done.
And then only to find out that no, no, it is not done. But the work that you did on it has served you well, because now it means you can do the next bit.
Yes.
And that this work carries on all through our life. One of the things I was thinking about aging was that I I want to I want to keep doing this work.
Mm.
This work that I do with people, this work with, you know, in a kind of like a small W, like I want to keep doing this work because I find it so enriching, so rewarding, so enlivening. And I want to keep doing this work with the capital W because I find it so enriching, so rewarding, so enlivening. They are utterly intertwined. But my sense is that we can have this idea that sort of elderhood or being older is a time of diminishing, that people should diminish, they should get quieter, they should not make such a fuss about stuff.
Mm.
This bizarre kind of cultural, and I know it is not every culture, but like cultural story of diminishment. But we're all going to get older with any luck. We'll all get older. And so why on earth would we be actively creating a society, a culture, an experience that means that just as we're like coming up into like the experience of like fullness, we go, oh no, okay, right now it's time to like shut it down and stop
Yeah, gonna
growing.
get the beige outfits out
Yeah.
and kind of like whimper away into the background.
I can't imagine anybody wakes up and thinks that's what I want. And yet, and yet, and yet it can, I think those kind of like pressures can be very, very strong.
But do you think that might be that we are not creating the spaces or the right spaces? We've created these kind of like, okay, so we come out of school, we go into university if we can afford it these days, we go into a job, we go into buying a house and parenthood. There's all these sort of milestones that we kind of go through, or gateways, whatever you want to call them. And then it's just met with the falling off a cliff. Whereas how about we turned that on its head and we created this? It is, in my world, it is colorful, it is the anti-beige. We create these spaces where you know humans, within our society, the elders are respected and they are revered and their voice has value for the rest of the community. And I'm not in a kind of like old school hall with a cup of tea and an old biscuit kind of way, but we're really integrating it more fully and more vibrantly into the everyday.
Yeah. And the
Um,
thing is, my sense is listening to that is that becomes possible, becomes even more possible when we have a sense of ourself as an elder.
yes.
Because otherwise what can happen, I think, is that we have such a culture of like anti-aging, that when you see, a woman or a man who's got gray hair and, wrinkled skin and, slightly rubbish nails and whatever, that there's this kind of like, I don't really want to look at that. I don't want to look at that because it reminds me that I might one day look and feel that way. And I don't like it. And so when we are able to look toward that version of ourselves with love, I think it becomes more possible for us to look towards people who are in that place with love.
Yes. And the people who are doing it with ease and with grace, and
That's
it
nice.
is not kind of, you know, the versions, the Botox, all of the things that are kind of, people are holding on to a younger version of themselves. Whereas it feels like we need to see more role models of men and women who are gracefully and at ease with their bodies and at ease with the world around them. This, that I want to head in that direction. That's part of my Prue Leith kind of story, is that, I've got my first grey hair, and I'm like, yeah, I have a grey hair. I've got my wrinkles. I don't do Botox or something, but I have a fringe for that at the moment. Tucked away quite nicely underneath there. But but it's not just how they are presented visually. It is what they are doing. What is important? What are they? It's not what they're fighting for, but how are they injecting themselves and their knowledge and their wisdom into the community around them?
Yeah.
More often than not, they are people who have, they have gathered some wealth. They don't have to, they've hit retirement ages and all of those things. How can we whip them into, or encourage them into, you have so much to offer. Come on in. The water's lovely. Let's get these conversations rolling, but not in a kind of awkward coffee morning.
Yeah, with the primary school coming in and saying, "What's it like to be old?"
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's. I was thinking that there's one of a friend of mine once said to me, when I was talking to her about, there were three women that at that time I was doing some work with, like receiving work from them, and all three of them were either in their mid to late 70s or early 80s, all actively still doing their amazing work. I mean, they are astonishing practitioners in their different fields. And I was just sharing, it's really interesting. I've kind of realized I'm like doing this work with these three much older women, and it feels really like amazing to be able to benefit from this wisdom that they've got and this lack of bullshit that they have as well, might I add, because they were just like, there isn't time. Quite honestly, we've just got to get to the point. Yes. And this friend said, there was this kind of big pause, and she just said, I don't know if I've got any older women in my life apart from my mum. And her relationship with her mum is quite complex.
Yeah.
So her relationship with aging potentially can be quite complex, because if our example of elderhood, if our only example of elderhood is someone with whom we've got some of that complexity, which often in family systems, of course, we have, and like, who doesn't, then that can be really challenging as well. So I love this idea of like this kind of reaching out, connecting with people who are older, people who are younger, because I recognize, those young men that I've met at like festivals, like I am like archetypal mother. There I am with my like warm smile and my kindness, and it's like I'm creating it. It's lovely.
Yeah.
And I am fully embracing like stepping into crone. I mean, to be honest, actually, really, I feel like crone. Like that is much more my thing. And so that feeling of being able to do this connecting like right through the ages, I think is so, so powerful. And then together we can support each other with doing this work, because these three women that I mentioned were three women that I turned to at a time when I really needed guidance. And they were amazing.
Are we putting out to the four directions, and are we putting out to under the mycelium networks in the earth? There is a call now to the women who are on a, who are consciously on a journey of discovery and of healing and of wisdom seeking. Are we putting out a message to them to say it is time to within however you want to do it, to start creating these spaces, to be opening yourself up to the wonderful women who are coming up through the AG ranks, to kind of go, okay, well, why don't we be doing this? Because I see very clearly that's you and me. As we evolve through this, we see this. We see how we can send back kindness and tenderness to our younger selves. We can see how we can send forward those pathways and those spider webby ways of, okay, well, this is how I see myself in my future. How can we move that energy? How can we create those spaces so that we are all benefiting from our elders as a collective? Is that something that needs to be going in at government level? Is it something that needs to be coming more grassrootsy, but not in the village hall and a biscuit way? What's the new way of doing that?
I think there's also something there as well, Katy, about also like taking a moment to see, is this already happening in some way? Because often, like when I'm working with someone who's seeking to create a particular change, often what becomes extraordinarily clear very, very quickly, I say often, I mean pretty much always, is that change has been subconsciously at work. Like some part of them has been doing that work before even the idea of making the change has come out of their mouth. Yeah. Like they've been doing that work. And you mentioned about mycelium networks. I was kind of like, I had this sort of sense of like, this, it could be quite interesting, because I was just like scanning through my own experience and thinking, am I doing this? Am I, without realizing, by connecting with these young people at festivals, by working with these older women, by reaching out, having this conversation with you, like
having the conversation at Wellbeing by the Lakes on the stage.
Exactly.
And those words that were coming out of women around, well, what does this mean to you? And the excitement, the big yay we got at the end from that woman. It's just like, okay, yeah, so we are. But it almost feels like, okay, how can we?
And it can look like so many things as well. When you sort of think about those things we've just said, it can look like so many things. I think that's because part of the challenge, I think, when there's this like, oh God, there's this need, is that we can start to box it in and say, and here's the rule about how it needs to happen, or this is how things happen, and so we need to get all up in our heads about it. But actually it kind of feels like to honor the nakedness. I really want to talk to you about nakedness in a minute as well, actually, but to honor the nakedness and to be really like, well, how can my interconnectedness with others really build on this, the value of this honoring of wisdom right the way through the ages? Because we meet some incredibly wise, very young people, don't we? I mean,
yes, and see, that's the other thing. I think the wisdom isn't the sole reserve for the elders, although I do always love the idea that as our bleed changes, and I think it's a shamanic thing that's called the wise blood, that when our bleed stops, it's the blood stays within you, and that is the wisdom staying within you. But I have, like you have said, I have met women, men who are young and full of a wisdom beyond their age. And that sounds like a really kind of like cliched and something like an older person would say to me, oh, haven't you grown? Aren't you wise beyond your years? But there is a truism in there too.
Well, maybe this is the fact that maybe we're even able to have this conversation in our ripe years that we are in, because of this shift, because like there is this movement maybe to tap into our innate wisdom rather than shutting it down at an early age and stuffing that in the box as well, which I definitely think I did. Definitely think I did that. It was really interesting. Just before we came on and started recording, I checked something on Instagram. I'm not addicted, I promise. And I checked something on there, and the thing that opened up was from Wisdom Keepers. I don't know if you know them.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my goodness me. Like, so for anyone listening, like if you're seeking a source of like wisdom and elderhood, like it's incredibly powerful. They do these beautiful conversations with people from Indigenous communities who are so wise and who get this in a way that,
we would fail to articulate.
Yeah,
in a way.
exactly.
Yeah.
And the woman that they were talking to was literally talking about, actually did I note it down or not? Oh, I'm not sure I did. That's really annoying. But she was literally talking about how vital it is that we maintain this connection with the experience of those who were born before us, in order that we, that expression of like standing on the shoulders of giants, in order that we can like benefit from their experience, their knowledge, their wisdom, and that then supercharges our growth. Like there is a real like what's in it for me about it.
I know. And it gets monetized and it gets commodified, and then suddenly it is moved way beyond what the intention or the understanding of what she is saying is. We have to be thankful for everything that has happened before, and they honor it incredibly well in Indigenous communities. Not so much here. Our kind of like our Celtic roots, yes, they do it in the past, but I feel like it is something that we are disconnected from, that we are disassociated from, how the people of this land would have done this work. We kind of, and there is massively a place for us when we talk about kind of, well, how can we tap into more of myself? How can we do this thing? And we talk about meditation, and we talk about mindfulness, and we talk about yoga as ways of doing it, but they are very Eastern practices. Whereas for millennia, the people of this land have been doing it, and it's called that, but they've been doing it in a different way. And I feel that is something that, as I progress on my path, that is something I am getting more and more drawn to, is how can we express what our ancestors have learned and the wisdoms that they have gained through hardship. Let's face it, we have a lot of comfort and we have a lot of security in the way that we live our life now. We have, solid buildings over our heads. Well, most of us do. But to kind of really honor how they have honored the land, how they have honored their ancestors. And I know that is something that, as part of my next spiral, is very much coming into vision. I don't know, and I have no idea how that gets expressed, but it is coming into this kind of like liminal space, the space that is in front of me. And I love it.
it's really, so I had this sort of I had this sense as you were speaking then, that it's like, so depending on what an individual's belief system is, um if we allowed ourselves to hold the idea that we move through multiple lives, if we just sort of allow that for a moment, I kind of had this sense that it's like, in one life, maybe your experience was in the East, in another life maybe it was in like the far north, in another life maybe it's here. And so maybe there's something there about why we're drawn to certain practices, even if like on paper it's not our like cultural heritage.
Yep.
And also I think it's really interesting. There's something about, do we, I'm kind of checking in with myself on this. Do we sometimes like, yeah, I mean, my answer is yes. Do we sometimes like look at something that's like, oh, it's different, it's a bit shiny, it's new, it's not the plain old boring stuff that we've got at home, and we think, oh, that's more, therefore more interesting, and then potentially risk rejecting something which is very close to home. And it's so funny, Katy. I literally had a conversation this morning, yesterday, in fact, with a friend who was here, staying in our retreat house. And I said to her, I keep thinking about shamanism and the energy of shamanism, and it all just sounds really noisy. Like, and I like it, just like there's a part of me that kind of thinks like I should be interested in that, because I've got a lot of the markers, yeah, but it just feels a bit noisy for my body. And I said, is there a space that's like that kind of thing but isn't as noisy? And she said, yeah, druids. And I was like, oh yeah, druids. And there we go. That would be my headline of what you're talking about, this kind of like connection with the earth, Celtic history, I mean, it
Everything
doesn't,
we have to hand that is here. Uh,
yeah, it's really interesting.
and it's so interesting, Henny, what you were saying about, and because I'm all in on the, okay, well, in past incarnations of my soul, I have been doing these things, and I'm very aware of those things. And okay, and I don't want to open up the cultural appropriation conversation, but I feel like we are dancing around the edges of it a little bit. Is okay, so if I have metaphysically lived in those lifetimes and I am drawn to some of their practices or some of their deities or some of their rituals, am I allowed to work with those, or am I not, because I don't physically come from a like maternal lineage or a paternal lineage from those places? And I find then the whole thing becomes a hotbed of lively debate and discussion, and then I kind of like, oh, okay, well, I'm just actually going to work gently with what I have around me.
It's a
And as
really, I think it's a really, really interesting point, actually, Katy, because there's obviously deep sensitivity around that for many very valid reasons. And a bit like, we kind of touched on the divine masculine, divine feminine, male, female, brotherhood, sisterhood groups. Like, there's sensitivity there as well. And I think what it speaks to is this stuff is complex.
yes,
And maybe like, it's interesting, isn't it? Like maybe part of the learning as we mature is the kind of, is the willingness to be in that place of discomfort without feeling as though we have to have a kind of hard and fast binary yes no feeling about it. I mean, it's a really good point. So on my altar, my shrine, I've got representations from pretty much every culture that I'm aware of is on there. And and I feel really comfortable about it. But I also recognize, actually, just with what you've said, that for somebody else that might cause them deep discomfort, and I would want to honor that feeling that they're having. So yeah, it feels like another episode to me.
But and you know, as with all your work and mine, there's okay, but if we can walk through this with a gentleness and a kindness and a compassion and an understanding of these things, you know, none of it is meant as an offense or as a slight or to cause harm to anyone, or you know, and for me that's anyone, you know, animism, it's anyone, anything, any living, we're all ensouled. How can we gently, and again it comes back to that lovely kind of ebb and flow, that tidal thing, that if we can move through things without a hardness, if we can bring in softness and a willingness to, you know, open our hearts to receive the things that maybe we haven't received, or to receive deeper wisdom or guidance, you know, then that just comes back to a really beautiful way of living and loving and being, with all our communities, with our sisterhoods, with our brotherhoods, you know, with our, you know, sisters and brothers who live further afield. You know, willingness just to be gentle.
Yeah. Oh, Katy. I'm really mindful that I said I wanted to talk about getting naked, and now I'm not sure that's like the right, but I still wanted, I still actually, I think it does touch on this, because I'm kind of mindful, sort of, we're kind of drawing to a close on this conversation, but it feels like this sense of gentleness, this sense of willingness to hold ourselves and each other gently, and this willingness to be in the flow, in the ebb and the flow. It also comes down to this acceptance of our physical form. And, you know, as we age, you know, of course our body changes. And one of the things I've been observing is with you is that I feel like you are like really in your body. And that is something I'm still working on that. So I am in my body with me. My experience of being like in my body with others, that's slightly different. So the idea of like, I don't know, a group of kind of women, you know, standing by the side of the river and everyone's stripping their clothes off and running in, like I'd be the one with my pants on, you know, like, like it's kind of I'm really mindful that that is an area of work for me. And I kind of, what this conversation has sparked has been this like, oh yeah, that's a really beautiful kind of thing to be gently holding space for, as I explore more my own experience of moving into elderhood, moving into my crone years, because my body is beautiful. Your body is beautiful. Everybody who's listening, everybody who's not listening, all of our bodies are so beautiful. They're so astonishing and incredible. And maybe there's something there about the kind of like the purity, the sort of essence of everything we've been saying, which really is wrapped up in that ability to be with ourselves as we are.
There is something about this kind of, you know, our body wraps around all of the things that we have had, you know, it is the vessel. It's holding all our experiences that we've had, whether they've been positive or negative experience. It is holding all our emotions. It is holding all of our dreams and our desires and our purpose and our deep kind of like womby wisdom. Our body holds all of that. And I am a naked person. I have a naked son. I have you know, we're a naked household. We are very comfortable with that. And you know, I will ebb and flow with the comfort of my nakedness. Like I could be one of the women on the beach who will strip down, and I will take my knickers off as well and jump joyfully into the sea. But I can also be at times excruciatingly aware of, okay, well, I am not a lithe 20-year-old. I am not, you know, all the things that kind of like, and then I'm just like, well, but all of the things that I am, all the things that I hold. And I love that I am as a way of just the kind of like the re-centering, of when the mind starts playing all its kind of like, oh, but you're not slim enough, you're not young enough, all of those things that it will want to come and bring in, that just I am all of these other things. And if you don't want to take off naked, get naked, then you don't have to.
Yes, exactly, because there are no rules.
Because there are no rules. And being naked is vulnerable.
Yeah.
In many ways.
And also I just sort of had a sense, when you said that feeling of like, those sort of doubts that come in, like, oh, I'm not a lithe 20-year-old. Well, actually, when I was 20 and I had a beautiful body, I mean, like, it was gorgeous. And obviously I covered it up because I thought I was fat.
Yes, and paralyzed with all of the other kind of insecurities of our 20s.
I've loved watching a 55-year-old woman, which is what I'll be in August, a 55-year-old woman stripping naked and jumping into the water and going, isn't this marvelous? So that is what I'm taking from this. I am going to do that at some point this summer. There we go.
I love it.
It's going to be beautiful. Oh, Katy, I have loved this.
Me too.
I have no idea. It's been an hour that we've been talking.
Has it? Okay.
It's been really, really lovely, and I have a strong sense I'd really love to meet with you again in this beautiful sacred space.
I would love that too, Henny. I really would. And I really love, there has been, anything that we talked about beforehand has just not even touched the sides. We have followed the kind of the web, beautiful, deep, and it almost feels quite symbolic web that we have followed for the nourishment of our hearts, and hopefully for the hearts of those who've been listening too.
Yeah, so sending all that love out into this space and beyond through the ripples. All right, take care, my darling.
Okay, bye.